The following is from the Pastor's Breakfast at the 2024 Fellowship Conference, New York.
So I have listened to a lot of your messages, Voddie's messages, and Scott Brown's messages on youth ministry and children's ministry. They really changed my whole theological thinking. I swiftly pulled my kids out of church youth ministry, and now I am pastoring a church. Applying that, we have the children sitting in the church taking notes while the pastor is preaching, instead of sending them off to color a picture of what Moses might have looked like. What advice do you have practically? Because we are calling the parents to their job of teaching their children. What other practical advice could you give in a church setting? Because I see that most children's ministry and youth ministries are a failure. I don't want to do this unbiblical thing just because youth ministry is popular and there are millions of dollars poured into it.
This requires a great deal of balance. It also will be different for each church with regard to the gifted individuals that are in that church. I think we would all agree that it's good to have children there in the congregation. Yet at the same time, I want us to start recognizing some things. We live in a world today where a child raised in a Christian home is going to have almost no social interaction except with brothers and sisters. I mean, we've reached a point in time where it's literally Sodom on the outside. One of the big failures I do see in the homeschool movement, and I see in this idea of, children are going to be just in the main service, is, first of all, the greatest social interaction ought to be between the children and their parents, and then the children with one another in the context of a family. And yet, I think there is a great importance of also building a community within the church and opportunities for children to interact with children. Not that those, the children are becoming the role model for other children. That's not what I'm saying. Keep the family structure. But also know this. We have children sitting in services, and the service flies so far over their head that they don't understand anything that's going on. So we can, we're not raising Puritan children. There was a time when children studied Latin and Greek at 5 years old. And so we need to be very, very careful. How is the truth being communicated to them? You can say children's church is wrong, and I do disagree with that. You can say a lot of youth group stuff is wrong, and I would agree with you on that. But the question is, you Puritan pastors who oftentimes speak over the heads of even adults, because you're so enamored with what you're studying and do not realize that the average person in the pew doesn't have a clue what you're talking about. How are you going to actually communicate truth to that child? And then here's another thing. How much time are churches spending teaching fathers? Teaching fathers how to communicate truth to their children? Very little. And so there ought to be classes in which we're saying, not just men, you should disciple your children, but we're going to teach you not one silly little lesson during some prayer breakfast, but we are going to months and months and months invest in you so that you can teach your children. And there needs to also be places like where children can interact with children, where they can go and do things and play and so many things. So here's the one thing I'll tell you. If you're going to take a lot away from these kids, and some of this stuff should be taken away from them, at least the way those things are being done. But whatever you take away, my question is, what are you going to put in its place? How is your... I'm going to just be honest with you. I'm no longer enamored with much of the language that we use. I'm no longer enamored with so many things. I've been studying, I really don't preach that much. I spend almost all my time taking care of missionaries and solving problems. But I look at pontificating, an hour-long sermon, everyone's proud about it, and I go, you could have said that in 20 minutes. And you could have used a lot different language because they're not reading the same Puritan books you are. Well, I'm preaching the truth. Is anyone understanding you? I mean, you went around in circles so many times that I don't even know if I can follow you, and I read the Puritans every day. I think we need to really sit down and take a look at how much truth is actually being communicated, not just to the children, but to the average man in the pew. I remember one time preaching, and I was preaching about the Great Commission. I was going on and on and on, and afterwards I saw him coming. A man came up to me, and I thought, okay, I need to get ready. I'm going to have to put this guy in a hold because he's going to take a swing at me. He was so angry. And I said, sir, let's just step aside over here. And this is what he said. He goes, you preachers. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, you're talking about all these glorious things, themes, and all these big words, and all this different stuff. My wife is ready to leave me. My children can't stand me. I got so many problems, and you're up here in glory, and I can't even understand what you're talking about. I think that's a good word. I love theology. How's that theology of yours getting down to those children? You boast about all our children are in the service. Wonderful. And what are they doing? So for me, my whole question is, what is the fruit of it? There's a lot of pride now about we don't have youth groups, and we don't have this, and we don't have that. And I guess that's, if you want to boast about that, but I know places, for example, out at Grace, John MacArthur's, where they have all kinds of things, and I hear children talking about truth that I don't even hear adults talking about, and they learned it in that children's group. I think that, we're really going to have to bump it up. We're really going to have to rethink. And I hope I'm hitting you here. I'm an older man, and I'm sitting there going, you know what? I'm so sick and tired of all this pontificating about so many things. Show me children that are growing in the faith. Show me actual people in the church who even understand what we're preaching. And I think this is very, very important. When I used to work with the Aguaduna tribe, you didn't walk in there with, I have my perfect exposition that would get an A from all the, Gestapo expositor people. You sat there and you watched faces, like Spurgeon said, and you're trying to teach. Just get them to understand the basics of the doctrine of justification. And you come at it this way, and you see confusion on their face, so you come at it another way. And maybe call someone forward and take a towel and say, now this represents your sin. It came on Christ. Anything to get the truth out, because it's not about just how wonderful your expository ability is, or you sound like a Puritan. You're not preaching to Puritans. How are they being taught? Now, I know I'm rambling, but this thing with children. So they all sit in your service. Wonderful. Go to them and ask them, can you explain to me the doctrine of justification or anything that I just said in this hour-long sermon of mine? And so I would go to people and say, did you understand that sermon? Can you speak it back to me? Go to children. Tell me what you learned. Nothing? Okay. I need to change something. Because you will know everything. You'll know them by their fruit, but you'll also know your style of ministry by the fruit. I'm going to tell you something that make you, where all of you will say, that guy's never coming back. I know right now an Arminian church that doesn't like Calvinism, and yet when I see the instruction of their children in the basic truths of the faith, it outshines at least most of the things I'm aware of. So the question is, who's actually learning? Another thing that's very important I want you to be careful of. When you get into the Reformed community, don't preach and minister so that when real important Reformed guys come into your church, they give you an A stamp of approval. Minister in order to care for the people where they're at. And so there are things, I want you to know that, brethren, someone asked me the other day, who's somebody that you really like to listen to? And they expected me to say, I said, David Jeremiah. I really like listening to him. I learn a lot. And his attitude and his heart. When I'm in a Reform conference and everybody, they ask all the speakers, who's your favorite preacher in history? And it's all, you've got to say John Calvin, or you've got to say this. I always go, J. Vernon McGee. And when everyone laughs, I go, how dare you? There was more wind and truth blowing through that man's sermons than all of you put together. What I want you to see is this. I am Reformed. I hold to the 1689. But be very careful that you don't fall into this rut where we're comparing ourselves by who's Reformed enough. They have children's church, or they have a school, or this or that. Don't do that. Look at the fruit of a man's ministry. Look at the fruit of the church's ministry.
Soon we will post further videos from this question and answer session on I'llBeHonest.com